Seth Mosley here. We're at Lipscomb University in their beautiful video facility, and we're doing the Made It Music podcast today. We've got Stephanie Wright with us. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. We're going to be learning about what it's like inside the record label machine. There's a lot of misconceptions out there and things that, neither of us probably even knew before getting into the business. That's how things work. So we're going to dive into that today.
Great.
So let's talk about, maybe take me back to the moment that you knew that you wanted to pursue a career in the music business.
Well, it was a long time ago, 20 plus years. I had moved here in my starter marriage with my husband at the time was trying to go to school at Meharry, and we had an option of going to Iowa or coming to Nashville. And my cousins were in the group Shadazy. I think at the time I moved here, they didn't have that name yet. They may have been the Osborne Sisters or the Violets or something. They were trying to figure out what they were going to be called. But I had flown out here to, sort of see what things were like. And that very weekend I came in, they signed their record deal. So I got to meet people like Linda Adele Howard and Randy Goodman and some of the writers that they had been writing with, Connie Harrington and Bonnie Baker. Carolyn Dawn Johnson was a good friend of theirs. And we went through this whole series of things we did that weekend between being in the studio and them signing, like I said, signing their deal. And at that point I was like, this is what Nashville is? This is amazing. Who knew this was all here? And I thought I could come out here and get a job in healthcare because that's what I'd been doing in Utah. But at that point, when I got here, I thought, well, that's something I want to do. Like, this looks really fun and sounds really fun. And I didn't realize that every weekend was not quite like that. And I learned that once we actually finally moved here. But
yeah, so going from that to obviously being in an A&R role now, what was the journey between that? Because you have a really interesting story of how you got into it.
Well, I think a lot of the people that are in the business side of it come through an internship program through one of the colleges, wherever that might be. I think there's a couple of them here, Belmont, MTSU. And I had not done that because I was several years down the path of college. But I knew I wanted to be a part of, what Kristen and Kelsey and Cassidy were doing somehow behind the scenes. I didn't want to be an artist. I didn't want to be a writer. But I could tell that there were these jobs behind there that I didn't even know really existed, between what a manager did or a business manager even. And in the process of kind of going to these interviews that I was going to, I would learn a little bit more each time, but realized I wasn't going to get any of these jobs because I hadn't come through some of those internships. I didn't have the relationships, and that's sort of how word of mouth spreads on how you get the job. And after going through a lot of rejection, there was an ad in the newspaper that came up for an executive assistant for a CEO of a major label. I was like, that's not how this works. That's not something.
That's crazy.
That's not. But I thought, well, why not? And I went ahead and went to the agency that was, on the newspaper. And I think I had to even take a type test and go through several interviews there. And then there was a couple people that they sent over to work or to be interviewed by, who at the time was the president and CEO, Pat Quigley at Capitol Nashville.
Yeah. So and that turned into that job, I'm assuming?
That turned into my job there, yes.
And how did that, what was the story between that and getting into A&R at a label?
Well, I was there for about 2 years, and I kind of refer to that as my internship because that was my first real looking inside a label and what that looked like with all the responsibilities that were there in each department, how that looked and what this department did and this department did. I immediately knew I didn't want to be in promotion. That seemed like a really hard job. And I saw people up on desks screaming at people on the phones about getting records played, and that just was not going to be something I wanted to do. But the A&R job did seem sort of intriguing, and I remember liking a lot of what marketing was doing. But I was just busy trying to, keep my head down and learn. And I had gone to lunch one day. I remember coming back, and Pat said, "Hey, there's a meeting going on back here. I don't know that I'm going to continue to be in this role, and I have a contract. You don't. The person they're bringing in has an assistant already, so you probably need to find something else. And really, I'd only been there for 2 years, and I thought, oh my word, my resume is just screwed at this point. What am I going to do? And then there was a girl that had worked with me. Her name's Haley McLemore, and she's been a promotion person. She's now a manager for a lot of major acts in our format. But she said, hey, there's an opening over here at Mercury in A&R. Why don't you come over here and interview and see if anything interests you there? And I had gone over. I met with Gary Harrison, who then introduced me to Carson Chamberlain. I think I was hired like 2 weeks later and started there and really didn't even know what I was doing other than still answering phone calls and setting up calendars and things. But I quickly learned that all of the publishing people that were important would come through that office, a lot of the acts, a lot of the writers, and I thought, oh, I like this. This is fun. But my process actually getting to the creative side of it was a little bit longer than most take two, because there was a woman who worked there, and her name was Claudia. She had been there for maybe 20 years, but she did the administration, the A&R administration side. And I had a young son, and I thought, well, if I want to be in the business for a while, I probably need to pursue that. That's where they're not getting fired every 2 years.
And you were saying specifically in the admin side?
So I thought, how do I focus on that? And Keith Stiegel was the head of our department. So he needed a production assistant as well as just someone kind of assisting there. I like within maybe a month, kind of organically went into that role of being the production assistant when he would go in the studio with Alan Jackson or whoever, Jamie O'Neill or Mark, whoever it was that he was producing at the time. And they therein shortly brought someone after to be there with me, and that they kind of took over the coordinator role.
Yeah. Well, and big congratulations on big promotion, late 2018. It's amazing.
Several years later. Thank you.
Well, what were the jobs kind of between then and, where you are now?
I mean, I did do the administration role probably up until about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was James Stroud that said, when he was at one point, he was the head of our department. He said, I need everybody in here to be creative. Even if you're paying bills, I want you still to be creative. You should know who the people are. And I was like, this is it. This is that moment that I can, start taking meetings. He said so. I can take meetings. And so and there was a few people that came in that probably were just starting to. I think about Jeff Skaggs, who had never had a pitch meeting with anyone. He was, probably just the mailroom guy, and he was pitching for DreamWorks or whatever. So I started taking meetings with that, and eventually it just spread. And that's when I discovered, people like Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally, and those people didn't even have publishing deals at the time. And they would come in and play their songs, Erin Enderlin being one, who came in and played Me Last Call, I think the same time Shane's song was getting pitched to by Erin's publishing company to Joe Fisher, who was working in our department at the same time. So, and that kind of led to, getting cuts. And then eventually that led into me talking people into signing Kacey Musgraves. And so from there, when Mike Dungan came over, he just said, I think you should probably just do creative 100% of the time. And I was like, yes. Yeah. Yes, I should.
Which, looking back now, Grammys later, I mean, that was a pretty good decision on your part to push them to do that.
Yes, I'm very thankful, but I'm also glad that I kind of took this path. It gave me an appreciation for the whole process of making a project, not just picking songs or getting artists in rooms or being with producers. I kind of looked overall, and I took the slow roll, but that meant I got to watch a lot of different executives do a bunch of different things, and that sort of helped me decide, oh, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And we ended up with, Sam Hunt going out and doing what he did and making a big impact in our format by me watching, by taking the slow roll and watching other people kind of mess up. I was able to go, okay, this is not what we do. This is not what we do. We do this instead.
Yeah, that's good. So how exactly would you describe your role now? What all does that encompass?
I think it encompasses a lot of different things, depending on where the artist is. If we're recruiting talent and it's a brand new baby act, chances are they're coming from a publishing company. or they've had some experience either coming to Nashville or writing, or at least being around enough to know what the Bluebird is and how some of this stuff all works. And it's a little bit of a faster pace on the new end now because you're having to jump in quicker because everybody's trying to sign these new acts that are coming in. So that's one part of it. The other part is dealing with a lot of these established acts that maybe are coming out on their sophomore record, or 3 or 4 projects in, and you're trying to help them go, okay, how do we assess where we're at? How do we continue to grow our audience? How do I stay within what I feel really great about and who I am as an artist and my brand, and how do I continue to get people to want to stay engaged, and who should I be writing with? Are these songs too, all the different variables that go on with creating a project, not just when you're brand new, but when you're, 3 or 4 projects in.
Yeah. So what does that kind of look like on a, weekly basis, if you can even, or a daily basis, if you can even kind of quantify that?
Some of it's taking song meetings and meeting with publishers. Some of it's having coffee with a writer. Some of it's having, drinks or lunch with an attorney, and that could vary within the day. But I would say, thankfully, there's still, time to listen to songs that are getting pitched, and having that engagement with people, because I think that's really where you find out the most information. It's a little easier these days to stay in your office and just be on the computer and listen to stuff through the internet as it's being sent. But there's an importance of still getting out and actually networking with people and finding out how the song's being created. And listening to music, I feel like I learn a lot about the writers. And when I hear that name pop up several times, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, what they're doing might actually work for Adam Hambrick or Maddie and Tay or Jordan Davis.
Yeah.
And so that's a good majority of it. Sometimes we go to writers' rounds. We do a lot of showcases. It involves traveling quite a bit, especially out to these acts that are newer, and seeing what their shows look like and how their, what their stage presence is, and how their show flows, and what songs are getting reactions and what aren't getting reactions. And then we take that back and go, okay, these songs right here are probably the things that we need to focus on when we go back in the studio.
So that's what I was going to ask. Is there a lot of travel in the role where you're kind of going out, seeing how these songs are reacting live? Because a lot of it is just, I would assume, just going with your gut, right? But
yes.
Then kind of validating it with,
yes.
Outside.
Yeah, it's amazing what
reaction.
You can actually. Yeah, I feel like artists get that full frontal, because they're there and they're trying to get that engagement from the audience, and they can tell whether or not something's reacting, especially if they've done it several times. And by the 4th show, you still have people trying to text, and they're not really. And now you kind of measure it by, phones are going up, people are recording, they're actually trying to record and watch at the same time. But you get to see that from, an audience perspective and what that reaction is. So I think it's important to be there and just kind of see all those things and experience that with the artist, so that when they come back and they say, no, I promise this is reacting, you actually have seen it happen. And you're like, okay, I get it, totally get it. This is going to be that song.
I think when we're talking about A&R, the role, what it is specifically, there's probably more misconceptions around what it is than almost anything else in the business. How would you define it? Like, what is A&R really?
Oh, that's a really good question. Especially in terms of, I always try to stay, I don't know. If I define it, then I have to stick to it, right?
Not necessarily.
I think it just, I do think it changes per artist, but I think it's a matter of helping the artists kind of channel what it is that they're trying to do and how they communicate that to their audience, and helping accent anything that you can to help them flourish in our market. And that could involve, several different pieces. Like I said, I could be one day kind of having a publisher hat on and helping with co-writes, or I could be setting up time for them to go in studio, or like today, going back with one of the artists and sitting down and sort of nailing how we're going to release a project and what songs need to go together in order to, give the audience what they're looking for or what they want to portray if we're doing something different than an album release. It really just varies all the time, but really it's just a matter of taking care of the artist and the creativity and being sort of a neutral zone within the label where you can look around and say, I know marketing needs this kind of song. I know this works better for streaming and this works better for terrestrial radio. But here's where we're not going to compromise. As an artist, they still have to have integrity and believe in what they're doing. And so you're kind of there as an advocate for them as well, just to make sure that, you're looking at the bigger picture from within the label, kind of like what a manager would do, but within the label, and trying to take care of the artist while you're listening to everybody else's needs and wanting to make sure you fulfill their needs as well.
That might be the best explanation I've ever heard of.
And it may change tomorrow. I don't know.
Yes, and it does. So, and you touched on it a little bit, but how is A&R different for a new artist versus somebody who's really established?
Well, I think the new artists come in, like I said, they come in a lot from publishing companies. So they've had a minute to sit in a writer's room and know whether or not they're a writer. You can help that by looking at an overall picture. Like if they're an artist that is a baby act on a publishing company, and the publishing company typically goes within their publishing company and has them write with their writers. I kind of look at it overall, and I can say, well, who you probably should be set up with is this, this, and this. And it's not always the typical, monster writer. We all love putting everybody in with Josh Osborne because he's amazing. But sometimes the younger acts need to sit in a room and kind of figure out what their perspective is as a writer and what they offer. So you kind of do that and help with that, get them in the right rooms, and then you help with the way the project's going to sound overall. If it's not someone that's been a writer with them that they're recording with, then who best do you marry that person up with? Do you call Seth Mosley and say, hey, I think you should probably work with this artist because I think you would get the way that they musically think. That changes if you were a more established artist because you've had several years where you've kind of figured that out. And maybe you're looking at it from a different perspective at that point and going, how do I, continue to stay inventive about what I'm doing and keep everybody engaged, but not go too far off brand, or be comfortable with where I'm at in life and be okay with, exposing that much of my life. Sometimes that's something you kind of have to consider too.
Sure. Yeah, that makes tons of sense. So
did I go down a rabbit hole there?
No, you didn't. That was
okay.
that was a good answer. I mean, how you're going to go about A&Ring a record for Sam Hunt versus whatever new artist you're signing is probably going to look entirely different.
Yeah.
So within your company, what does the structure look like? I think a lot of people are very curious of, okay, you mentioned obviously publishers are walking into your room, there's writers coming in. What does it look like if it was kind of like an org chart, like for Universal?
It's sort of divided up in sections where you have an overall marketing strategy, and within that you have publicity that funnels up through there. You have a creative department that helps with imaging and videos and whatever like all the stuff that comes out. You have a digital marketing component that deals with a lot of the socials and how all that kind of cohesively works within the label. Then you have promotion teams that go out and market specifically to terrestrial, or promote directly to terrestrial radio. Really, that's sort of what separates the imprints. Overall at Universal, we have, Universal Music Group Nashville, but within that we have EMI, MCA, Capitol, and who am I missing? Mercury.
Yeah.
And those people specific to that promotion staff are really what changes up the artist in being on Mercury. Everyone else sort of is working on all the artists. And we try to kind of get a point person for each department and kind of collectively meet up often to make sure that we're, moving forward correctly on each artist. And A&R's, obviously one of those components as well, but that's
Sure.
kind of how everything works.
Is there any overlap between, your company and others? Like, I don't know, joint ventures? Are there things that you guys do that require other companies? Or is everything pretty self-contained?
There are, and I can't really speak specific to what marketing or digital does. I know I rely heavily on our publishing community. I think that there probably are independent A&R people out there that do some things. We have worked with them on occasion on different projects and brought them in. We also have joint ventures. There's a couple of them. One in particular, well, it's not a joint venture. It's a partnership with Disney. We have Buena Vista Records, and the counterpart to my role over there is Mike Daly. And we talk often about Adam Hambrick or CB30 and kind of approach it from two different angles. He lives in LA. He has sort of a tap into that world. And so I rely on him when I have to ask about, would it be smart to bring these guys out and write for several days out there? Or would it be better to have, do you have people over there that you feel like are coming to Nashville that we should make sure that they get involved with? Or what else do you have going on out there that we need to make sure that the Nashville artists are coming out there and doing?
Sure. So for those type of deals, why would some be structured that way? Like, why would you guys have, maybe an artist shared with Disney, like you mentioned, or is it kind of where it originates, or how does that work?
That's sort of above where I make those decisions are made on an executive level. And I'm not sure how the Disney imprint came to fruition, other than I'm sure Ken Bunt and Mike had a conversation and they decided it would be a good partnership. We have several different, we have a joint, a couple of artists that are shared with pop labels that are sister labels to us. Cassie Ashton is signed joint with Interscope and with Universal. And I think mainly because of the type of music she creates, where it could potentially fall in our format. There may be certain things that we could work potentially out of here, and there also are things that they can potentially work out of their world.
More on the pop side versus just country. So, and that was going to be my next question: is how do you guys handle genre? Is there genre overlap in your system? You kind of answered it a little bit, but
it is a little tricky, and I've noticed that's the one thing that I feel like has stayed consistent. I think everyone's always questioning, well, what is country? But I've heard that the entire time I've been in this business. What is country? And I feel like there's ebb and flow of it's really pop, and then it kind of comes back into more of a traditional sense, and then it leans maybe a little bit further Americana, and then it kind of comes back in. And I think now, because of streaming and playlisting and the ability for people to go in and do their own and create their own playlists, it's a little bit more organic than or easier, I guess, than us making mixtapes or whatever we used to do when we would, in my case, record the top 30 countdown and only get certain songs on cassette and make a mixtape. But I think because of that, the bleed of what's defined as country is a little bit harder. Like you have Kacey Musgraves, who is a country artist, but maybe the production leans a little bit pop, but the songs themselves are core country and it's storytelling. But then again, I feel like Ed Sheeran is also a storyteller and he's in the pop world. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to define right now, but I think it always has been.
Sure. So how does that influence your role in the process? I mean, are you kind of ever trying to guide people to be a little more country or less country or more pop or less pop? How do you navigate that?
I think really my job is just to keep them authentic. I tend to lean in people who have their own lane. So they have something about them that sets them apart from everyone else. At the core, I think that's what everybody's trying to find, honestly. But I don't necessarily want to push them into, a more traditional lane if that's not what they're naturally geared to do. I think just authenticity will end up showing through. So you have to kind of keep them, don't let them be influenced by, even if radio says, we might want to take out, the snaps or something. You kind of have to evaluate, what are you actually saying? What are you actually doing? What is it you mean by that? Is it about the beat and the rhythm, and should we fix this? And does this feel okay to you? But I don't know that I want to push them one way or the other. I've watched in the past where we've done that and it has not worked, where we've vanillaed somebody down to, this is how you should dress, this is how you should sing, this is how your song should sound. And at that point they've kind of lost who they started out being, and that they're just sitting turning going, well, who am I? And I think maybe my role more than anything is just to say, stay true to your gut. Yeah. You should listen to the people around you that are advising you because they've been in this business for a long time. But at the end of the day, you still have to be in check with your core when you go to bed at night. You have to know that what you're doing, you're passionate about. And you're not going to be mad if you hear it 10, 15 years from now.
Well, that's so huge. And I'm sure every artist watching this probably is rejoicing in their wherever they are, thinking, okay, labels are not evil. A&R doesn't want to change us. Like, I think that's maybe a whatever misconception or something. But I love how you hit on that your job is really just to protect an artist from veering off of the path of authenticity.
Yeah. And then creating opportunities for them to kind of grow. And I think we were talking about a little earlier being uncomfortable and getting out of their comfort zone, because sometimes it's just a matter of stretching and getting out where you might learn something if you're in a room with a writer that maybe you wouldn't particularly think would be helpful, but you take something back to the people you write with all the time, and all of a sudden you're a better writer and the song's better because you've learned something. And I think it's just a matter of maybe helping them walk through those exercises and remind them that creativity is a little bit like a muscle where you have to push yourself and continue to exercise it every day.
It's like training.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so good. I want to ask about, can you explain the idea behind imprints? Like, what is an imprint? Why does your label have them? Why not just Universal? Like, what is an imprint?
Well, I mean, in our world, and I'm probably not the right person to ask this, but and to me, it just means that's basically the imprint is there's probably legal stuff that I don't really know about, but in our world, the way we function, that really is basically terrestrial radio. And that's the people that work songs to radio, essentially, are the imprint, I guess, because otherwise the rest of us are all just Universal. They're a part of Universal too, but they're specific to Mercury artists. And we sort of divide that according to what that promotion team kind of gears themselves to.
Yeah, so like stylistically, maybe artist personality wise a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like there's maybe an imprint that has a little bit more left of center artists, and they just know how to kind of get those artists through the machine of how radio works, and they know how to work their radio people, whereas others might be down the middle mainstream country.
So when you sign an artist, you're not necessarily thinking in terms of this artist would be good for this imprint or this one or the other.
I don't know. I think instinctually, much like I feel about an artist when I see him, I probably kind of already go, okay, I can see this could fit here. But artists often ask that when they come in. They're like, which imprint am I going to go on?
Yeah.
And I'm always like, well, the best one. It's going to be the very best one. Well, how do we know that? Well, because they're going to be the ones that have the space and the time and the energy to devote for you. They're passionate about what you're doing. And it is a hard job to go out there and push to get a lot of these songs when you're competing against a bunch of other artists for radio space. And that's probably it's not just for radio. I mean, I know that our digital departments are doing the same thing on playlisting, but they have to be passionate about you. And so you want them to raise their hand and go, no, I get this. I totally know what we could do. We could take them out and do this, or we're going to launch them this way. So
that's a good answer. And to kind of piggyback on that, how often does your organization experience like shifts in maybe just the structure of it, or even overall strategy of it?
Well, it really depends on the artist. And I think that much like I want them to be authentic, that there's goals and you kind of set those up from the beginning. What is it that you are looking to accomplish? What is it that you see in 5 years? And I know it's a hard question for anybody to answer. But how do we help you get from where you're at now to where you want to be? And how do we become good musical partners in that sense? And then you sort of kind of take those goals and you figure out what strategy you need to get there. Is it going directly to, the digital partners and saying, hey, we're going to launch it this way and do it this direction? Or does it involve going out on radio tour? Or do you go make a bunch of visual products that go out to or content that go out to YouTube? Like, how do you see this working best for you? And where do we see where we have some steam, and how can we best, like, would you feel comfortable if we did it this way, and kind of cater it to what it is that they're wanting? And I'm sure as a company, we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the company overall, and, everybody's making money and doing the right thing.
Sure. So, but big picture, strategy wise, is it kind of always tend to be the same thing, or is that, obviously we're now versus 10 years ago, I'm sure it was drastically different in terms of maybe the end goal.
Yes. Well, I do think you have to define it differently. It might have been selling 6 million, albums, and now you look at it differently. And or some people are like, they want 5 number ones on radio, and that's where you have to approach it from. But I think it changes. Not even it'll, by the time I say this, it'll change in 6 months from now, and we'll have to have something different. And I think you just have to be really flexible and really fluid, and kind of do what's best for however you're going about launching that artist. I think there's not one size fits all at all anymore.
Sure. So when you're looking to sign a new artist, do you have any set expectations on ROI in particular, like just getting return on the investment? How do you go about, setting those expectations?
I think you have to go into it knowing that it's going to not be instant.
Yeah, sure.
And you have to know that they are going to be in it for the long haul too. You try to have a lot of those discussions up front. Do you want to be someone that's on the road all the time? Are you going to be okay with leaving your family? This seems a lot easier. It's very sexy and all this stuff is amazing, but then you're gone a lot and you're not going to have time with your kids. Or, what does this look like 5 years from now when you do have a family? So you kind of think about those things. What are their goals to, open up shows? Are they just going to be good with doing a circuit of bars, or do they want to play at LP Field or Nissan Stadium or whatever the venue is? And kind of look at that. I would think Mike would always opt for the Nissan Stadium.
Sure.
That would be the end goal. But we also know that that's just not that way it works. Everybody's got sort of different paths and are going to get to and you just have to figure out if it makes sense, if you can help that person get to those goals.
Yeah. So from the end of the label, knowing that, okay, this is not going to be an instant thing. We're not just going to, put all of our efforts and resources behind an artist and we'll return our money tomorrow. Like it's not just going to happen like that.
It's not. It's a slower roll than most people think. And I think we've heard it said a lot. People have been here for 10 years and they're like, how we've never heard of you? You've been here for 10 years. But I think it's just that grind of figuring it out and being out on the road and kind of, moving things forward. No,
that's good. I think a lot of people, question what do labels actually look for. And what I'm hearing you say is like, okay, well, if we get behind an artist, we got to know that we're in it for, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, because you're not just going to snap your finger magically and have an artist just be headlining Nissan Stadium,
right?
As you mentioned, overnight.
One, I do think it shifted a little bit, because I think at the time I started, everything was focused sort of on an overall album, and we would work toward an album. And now I think it feels like our format's a little bit more song driven, like per song. And artist deals may look differently in the future. It may not be that, we're setting up album deals. Maybe it's something other than that. The way we release songs, I think the consumption of music is at more of a rapid pace. Radio still tends to run a little bit slower, just in the crawl of what it takes to get up the charts and that whole spin game. But as far as putting music out there, I think, in order for an artist to stay out on the road, they have to have music that's released more often than just 2 songs a year, potentially, especially if you're a baby act. So I think we're just having to look at that a little bit differently too.
Yeah. And when you're looking at artists on the front end, what makes an artist signable in the first place?
Well, I sort of am a sucker for a good texture and voice and that kind of thing. You want to know that they can actually deliver something when you sit them down in front of people. Sometimes it's the songwriting's there, and you probably just need to refine a little bit more how it sounds when it's coming out. They just have that sort of intangible thing that you can't really write down on a piece of paper. Like if you're going in for a job interview and you fill out the form and it says you have to do this and type this fast and whatever, there's a lot of that intangible stuff that happens that you can't really define when you're around someone, but you can feel it. I remember thinking that the moment I sat down with Sam, and just there was a presence about him and some sort of confidence that I don't know if he knew, or maybe he does know he has it, but and I had the same thing with Kacey, and I didn't really know her. I cold called her one night and said, I know you don't know me, but I've heard a couple of your songs and I think we should go have lunch. And we did. And I just remember sitting across the table from her thinking, she's got all these things, and I don't even know she knows that she has all this stuff about her. But I came back going, oh, I got to figure out how to work with her. And I felt the same way about Sam.
Wow. That's very well said. And your gut has it is and your gut has proven to be right in both of those instances. So can you talk about what enables an artist, just since we're talking about Sam and Kacey, what enables an artist to have longevity in over, they're not just going to be a one-hit wonder?
Well, I think those two artists specifically are similar in that they both are very confident in their songwriting and ability to talk to their listener. Kacey's good about the conversational aspect of her songwriting. She's very comfortable with, and I feel like that potentially is part of it. I also think the endurance of how the rigorous schedule and being able to be on camera at one point and then turning around and doing a phoner and then sitting in a writer's room and writing and then being on stage and then the travel in between and not getting exhausted. And I think there's a reason that there's not a ton of superstars, because that's a lot of endurance to get to that point. And some of it involves luck and timing. I think about Chris Stapleton and how he's been here for years writing, and we all loved the songwriting that he was doing, but he had taken a couple stabs at radio, one, I don't know, two before I think that golden moment when he was at the award show and won those awards and performed with Justin, and it just completely took off from there and changed everything for him. But some of that just happened to be timing. Sure. And strategy. Yeah. You always want to hope that those things line up, but I think that's part of it. In Sam's case, or even in Kacey's case, I think they were just so unique and different at the time they came out that people gravitated to it. They're much like maybe the Dixie Chicks were when they came out, because people are like, oh, I love this. I didn't know I liked this. I didn't know we needed this, but now I know we need this. So that's part of it. That's
so good. Well, as we're wrapping up, we are going to dive into our last portion of the interview, which we call the lightning round. Lightning round. Best advice ever given to you?
Ooh, I think it's just to have courage and to be inclusive. I think a lot of times we don't realize we should share what we have with others, and much like this.
You're doing it right now.
Yes. And I didn't really have a lot of that. I didn't have like a mentor that sat down and said, you're going about this the right way, or you're not, or do you have questions? And I found myself always wanting to look at these young kids going, this is why this didn't work. This is what you should stand up for yourself and insert yourself in this position. Because I didn't have that. I kind of had to figure that out on my own.
It's good. Top trait in the successful artists that you work with?
Being kind. I look at Reba and Kenny and Luke, Chris, and they're nice. They're nice to everyone. I think it makes a big difference.
Wow, that's good. One thing you wish would change in the music industry?
Well, maybe the pace, and I mean that on many levels. The pace of how quickly we have to turn things around now, and how quickly artists are getting signed, and how quickly they have to develop. And sometimes that's not good or bad, but I do wish that part of it would slow down a little bit. On the other side of it, I feel like maybe the crawl at radio is a little slower, and I wish that would speed up a little bit faster.
Yeah.
So I guess overall pace.
Yeah, that's good. Let's see. Favorite. Okay, well, here's a good one. What about a song that almost didn't make a record that turned out to be a hit? Do you have any of those experiences?
Ooh, I might have had to think about that a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm going back through. Last call, quite honestly, I remember I was in the studio with Leanne, and she wasn't 100% sure she wanted to cut it. And she's like, does the label really like this? I mean, do y'all really like this song? And I was like, yes, you have to put it on your project. Yes, you need to go in and sing this song. Yes.
Wow.
And then she went in, and that ended up being a big success for her. And therefore kind of being a success for the writers too.
Yeah, of course. That's awesome. Yeah. And lastly, let's do a fun one. What about your favorite? Okay, we'll go serious. We'll go first song that really impacted your life.
Whew. I don't know, I'm sure it was some Def Leppard song.
Yeah.
I can't even think how far back that would be. I know it impacts my life now. Yeah. What I really enjoy is watching my kids sort of discover songs and artists and how they enjoy listening to a lot of the stuff that we either are putting out or how they're, influenced by the young artists that are coming out on all the other formats as well. I don't know. I'd have to think back about that. Sorry. I guess that was not a good answer.
No, hey, that was an answer. That's awesome. Well, Stephanie, this has been an absolute pleasure. I am going to go back and listen to this just because I feel like there's so much that I learned in this conversation. I'm sure our audience learned an absolute ton as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And for those of you guys who are interested, we are going to be doing a deep dive, little bonus segment on getting a job in the music business, more specifically on a record label. We're going to talk for a few minutes on that. So you can check that out at madeitmusic.com. Just go to the episodes page and find the Stephanie Wright episode. It'll be right there. So Stephanie, thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for hanging out on this YouTube video with us. In case you didn't know, this is from the Made It in Music podcast, Season 2. We have a ton of awesome guests that come on the show, all music business professionals, to share their knowledge and experience with you. So if you want to subscribe to not miss any future episodes, hit that subscribe button on YouTube and you'll be notified about all of them. And in case you didn't know, we do a deep dive for every episode where we go really in depth on a certain topic from each podcast episode. So sign up right here to get free unlimited access to all of those deep dives from our podcast. And if you want to watch another Made It in Music podcast video, click here.